The station hummed with artificial life, but Sarah Chen felt nothing but cold metal beneath her feet. She walked through the corridors of Harmony's Edge, watching aliens of dozens of species move past her without a second glance. To them, she was just another human, just another worker bee in their perfect galactic hive. Sarah adjusted her simple gray uniform and checked the time on her wrist display. Another council meeting in 10 minutes. Another chance for the Galactic Consortium to remind humanity exactly where they stood in the universe's pecking order, which was somewhere near the bottom, just above the species they used for food. She passed a group of Zephyrians, their tall blue forms moving with that elegant grace they were so proud of. One of them looked down at her with those large silver eyes and made a clicking sound. The others laughed. Sarah knew enough Zephyrian to understand they were joking about humans and their cute little emotions. Sarah kept walking. She had learned long ago not to react. Reactions only made things worse for her people. The council chamber was a massive dome that could hold thousands, but today only the core members were present. Sarah took her place at the small human section, a tiny corner that barely counted as representation. Around her, the real powers of the galaxy settled into their grand floating platforms. The hegemony dominated the center, their massive forms requiring platforms twice the size of anyone else's. The Zephyrians floated gracefully nearby, their technology so advanced it seemed like magic. The crystal minds hummed with collective thought, their diamond bodies catching the light like living jewels. And then there were the humans. 5 representatives for a species of 12 billion souls scattered across 43 colonies. High Chancellor Vex 9 of the hegemony began the session. His voice boomed through the chamber's translation systems, turning his deep growls into crisp words that every species could understand. Today we address the human petition regarding mining rights in the Sol system, Vex 9 announced. Sarah straightened. They had been waiting 3 years for this decision. Earth needed those asteroid belt resources desperately. Their growing population was stretching their limited supplies thin, and the consortium's trade restrictions made it nearly impossible to buy what they needed from other species. Delegate Zithka of the Zephyrians rose from her platform, her form shimmering like a mirage. The consortium has reviewed this request carefully, she began, her voice carrying that musical quality that made everything sound like poetry. However, we must consider the greater good of galactic harmony. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. She already knew where this was heading. Humans are still a young species, Zithka continued. They lack the wisdom and restraint necessary for large-scale resource extraction. We have seen what they do to their own planets. The scars on Earth speak for themselves. A few other delegates made sounds of agreement. Sarah wanted to stand up and scream. Those scars were old from before humanity learned better. They had spent 2 centuries healing their world, developing clean technologies, learning to work with nature instead of against it. But none of that mattered to the consortium. Furthermore, Zithka went on, the Sol system's resources would be better utilized by more experienced species. The hegemony has expressed interest in establishing a processing facility for organic waste in that region. Sarah's blood turned to ice. A waste facility? She said, standing up before she could stop herself.
You want to put a garbage dump in our home system?
The chamber fell silent. Several delegates turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from surprise to disgust. Speaking out of turn was a serious breach of protocol. High Chancellor Vex 9's massive head swiveled toward her. Ambassador Chen, you will contain your emotional outbursts or be removed from these proceedings. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to speak calmly. High Chancellor, with respect, this facility would contaminate our entire system. The waste products would affect not just the asteroid belt, but potentially Earth itself. You're talking about the home of 12 billion people. 12 billion humans, corrected Delegate Thrum 3 of the Crystal Mines, their voice like breaking glass. The hegemony facility would serve 18 different species across 47 systems. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But there are other locations, Sarah insisted. Empty systems that wouldn't threaten inhabited worlds. Empty systems that would be more expensive to utilize, Zithka replied. The consortium operates on principles of efficiency, Ambassador Chen. Surely even humans can understand basic economics. The insult hit home, but Sarah pushed forward. Then let us mine the asteroids ourselves. We'll sell the materials to the consortium at reduced rates. Everyone benefits. Vex 9 made a sound that might have been laughter if it came from something with a sense of humor. Humans operating heavy mining equipment? The insurance costs alone would be astronomical. No, the decision is final. The Sol system will host Waste Processing Station Alpha 7 within the next solar cycle. Sarah's world tilted. They weren't just being denied resources. They were being told that their home system would become a garbage dump for species that wouldn't even let them sit at the main council table. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We can and we will," Zithka replied. "Unless, of course, humanity wishes to withdraw from consortium protection entirely. I'm sure the Void Hunters would be delighted to learn that human space is no longer under our authority." The threat was clear. The Void Hunters were raiders who swept through unprotected systems, taking slaves and resources. The only thing keeping them out of human space was the consortium's protection. Protection that came with a very high price. Sarah looked around the chamber at the faces staring back at her. Some showed mild interest, like scientists observing an insect under glass. Others displayed open contempt. A few seemed genuinely puzzled by her distress, as if they couldn't understand why anyone would object to having their home turned into a dump. Not one showed sympathy. "The session is concluded," Vex 9 announced. "All parties will receive detailed implementation schedules within one standard cycle." As the delegates began to disperse, Sarah remained standing in her small corner. She watched them go, these beings who held the power of life and death over her entire species. They chatted casually among themselves, already moving on to other business. She had tried diplomacy. She had tried negotiation. She had tried begging. None of it mattered. That evening, Sarah sat in her small quarters aboard the station. The room was barely large enough for a bed and desk, befitting her status as a minor species representative. She stared at her secure communication terminal for a long time before finally activating it. The encryption protocols took several minutes to engage. When the green light finally appeared, Sarah took a deep breath and typed a single message. "Protocol Omega, it's time." She sent the message and then deleted all traces of it from her system. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn something that the consortium had overlooked in all their careful calculations about human weakness and emotional instability. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the creature that roars and threatens. Sometimes it's the one that has been quietly preparing while everyone else assumed it was harmless. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Marcus Rivera received the message at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time. 4 simple words that would change everything. Marcus had been waiting for this moment for 23 years. Ever since he was a young lieutenant and witnessed his first diplomatic humiliation, he remembered watching the news feeds as human ambassadors were forced to stand while other species sat. He remembered the trade restrictions that kept human colonies barely supplied. He remembered the casual cruelty of beings who saw his entire species as nothing more than useful pets. But mostly he remembered the secret meeting in 2387, when the real leaders of humanity gathered in a bunker just like this one. That was the day they decided to stop begging and start preparing. "Sir?" Major Williams appeared at his shoulder. "The message?" "Send it," Marcus said quietly. "All stations, all fleets. Authorization Omega 77 Alpha." Williams nodded and moved to the communications array. Within seconds, coded signals began racing through space at faster-than-light speeds. Signals that would reach hidden facilities on Mars, Europa, Titan, and dozens of other human outposts. The consortium thought they knew everything about humanity. Their surveillance networks monitored human communications, tracked human ships, observed human industrial output. What they saw was a species struggling to maintain their small corner of the galaxy. Factories producing basic goods. Shipyards building simple cargo vessels, mining operations extracting just enough resources to survive. They never looked deeper. On Mars, Director Kim Sato watched her screens as the authorization came through. Around her, technicians began powering up systems that had been carefully disguised for decades. The agricultural processing center that fed the Martian colonies revealed its true purpose as blast doors rolled back. 57 ships sat in underground hangars, their hulls dark and waiting. Not cargo haulers or mining vessels, but predators built for one purpose: war. These weren't copies of consortium designs. Human engineers had studied captured alien technology for generations, but they hadn't simply copied what they found. They had improved it, adapted it, made it uniquely human. Where alien ships relied on energy shields and elegant maneuvers, human vessels carried armor plating and redundant systems. Where alien weapons were designed for precision strikes, Human guns were built to keep firing even when half the ship was gone. Where alien crews expected clean, civilized warfare, human ships were equipped with boarding pods and close combat weapons. "All ships report ready," Kim announced into her comm system. Mars Defense Fleet standing by. Similar scenes played out across the solar system. On Europa, the ice mining facility revealed itself as a massive shipyard. On Titan, the research station began launching fighter squadrons. Even on Earth itself, the weather monitoring stations at both poles opened like flowers to release ships that had been assembled in absolute secrecy. The consortium had made one crucial mistake in their evaluation of humanity. They had assumed that because humans fought among themselves, they couldn't unite against outside threats. They had seen the old wars, the tribal conflicts, the nations that rose and fell throughout human history. They had missed the simple truth that humans had learned over thousands of years of warfare. Nothing unites enemies faster than a common threat. Marcus watched the status reports flow in from around the solar system. Fleet elements from every major human colony were checking in: the European Federation's stealth cruisers, the Asian Confederation's missile boats, the American Union's heavy battleships, the African Alliance's fast attack craft, nations that had been rivals for centuries, working together with perfect coordination. But the real surprise wasn't the ships themselves. It was what they carried. Dr. Elizabeth Harper had spent 15 years working on what the consortium believed was terraforming research. In reality, she had been developing weapons specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses of every major consortium species. Sonic disruptors that could shatter Zephyrian bone structure, magnetic pulse weapons that interfered with crystal mind communication networks, chemical agents that played havoc with hegemony breathing apparatus, not weapons of mass destruction, but precision instruments designed to level the playing field. "Sir," communications specialist Torres called out, "we're getting reports from our monitoring stations. Consortium ships are beginning to respond to unusual activity in human space." Marcus nodded. They had expected this. The consortium's sensor networks would have detected the massive energy signatures as human facilities came online. Right now, alien commanders were trying to figure out why the humans had suddenly become so much more active. "How long until the first consortium response fleet arrives?" Marcus asked. 6 hours, 17 minutes to the outer system perimeter," Torres replied. "Admiral Kenthvar's task force from the Proxima station." Marcus smiled grimly. Kenthvar was hegemony, a species that prided itself on overwhelming force in traditional tactics. He would come in with guns blazing, expecting to cow the humans into submission with a show of superior firepower. He was going to learn the hard way that humans had been studying hegemony battle doctrine for 50 years. "Signal all commands," Marcus ordered. "Phase 1 begins in 6 hours. All units are to remember their training. We are not trying to win a clean victory. We are trying to teach the galaxy that attacking humanity comes with a price." Around the solar system, ships that had waited in darkness for decades began moving toward their positions. On Earth itself, the Global Defense Network came online for the first time since its construction began. The consortium had orbital monitoring stations throughout human space, carefully watching for any signs of military buildup. What they hadn't realized was that humans had been building their real defenses inside asteroids, in the shadows of planets, and in the empty spaces between worlds. For 75 years, humanity had been preparing for this moment. Every insult had been catalogued. Every restriction had been noted. Every casual cruelty had been remembered by a species with very long memories and an unfortunate talent for holding grudges. The consortium was about to learn why humans had conquered every environment on their homeworld, survived ice ages and asteroid impacts, and fought their way to the stars despite having no help from anyone else. They were about to learn why the most successful predators aren't always the biggest or strongest. Sometimes they're the ones smart enough to hide their teeth until it's too late for their prey to run. Marcus Rivera looked at the tactical display showing the positions of every human ship in the solar system. Hundreds of vessels, thousands of crew members, all waiting for his command. "Gentlemen," he said into the fleet communication system, "for 75 years we've been told we're not good enough, not smart enough, not civilized enough. Today we show them what humanity looks like when we stop being civilized." The acknowledgments came back from across the solar system, voices speaking dozens of different languages but all saying the same thing. "Ready, sir?" Marcus checked the timer on his console. 5 hours and 43 minutes until the consortium fleet arrived. 5 hours and 43 minutes until the galaxy learned what happened when you pushed humans too far. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the HSF Vindication, watching the enemy fleet approach through the tactical display. 12 consortium vessels led by Admiral Kentvar's flagship, the Endless Authority. They moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the confidence of a species that had never lost a real war. "Range?" Elena asked. 4 million kilometers in closing, reported Lieutenant Chen from the sensor station. They're broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies. Elena almost smiled. The consortium was giving humanity one last chance to back down, to apologize for whatever technical malfunction had caused all this unusual activity. They still thought this was some kind of misunderstanding. "Any response from command?" she asked. "Admiral Rivera's compliments," Communications Officer Park replied. "Execute Operation Thunderclap on your discretion." Elena nodded and activated the fleet command circuit. Around her, the bridges of 37 human warships waited for her signal. Ships that had been hidden in the asteroid belt, disguised as mining platforms and research stations. "All units," she said calmly, "this is Vindication Actual. You know what they've done to us. You know what they plan to do to our home. Today we remind the galaxy that humans don't forgive, and we definitely don't forget." The response came back as a chorus of acknowledgments. Elena could hear the anger in those voices, the frustration of decades spent bowing to beings who saw them as inferior. "Weapons free," she ordered. "Show them what we learned from their own technology." The consortium ships were still broadcasting their surrender demands when the first human weapons fired. Not from visible ships, but from asteroids that suddenly revealed themselves as weapons platforms. Railguns that had been built into chunks of space rock opened fire with projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The alien shields flickered as solid metal slugs slammed into them. Consortium energy barriers were designed to deflect energy weapons and missiles. They weren't prepared for simple kinetic rounds fired with inhuman accuracy. Admiral Kentvar's voice cut across the communication channels, speaking in the deep growls of his species. The translation came through a moment later. "What is the meaning of this attack? We demand an immediate ceasefire." Elena activated the response channel. "Admiral, this is Captain Vasquez of the Human Defense Force. We're delivering a message from the people of Earth." "What message?" Kentvar demanded. "Get out of our system." The consortium fleet began evasive maneuvers, their elegant ships dancing through space with practiced grace. But they were dancing into a trap that had been 50 years in the making. Elena watched as the enemy ships moved exactly where human tactical computers had predicted they would go. Zephyrian doctrine called for high-speed flanking maneuvers. Hegemony ships relied on concentrated firepower. Crystal mine vessels operated in perfect coordination, all of which human military analysts had been studying since the first diplomatic missions. "Spring it," Elena ordered. Throughout the asteroid belt, human ships that had been playing dead suddenly came to life. The enemy found themselves surrounded by vessels that had been waiting in silence, their crews breathing recycled air and eating cold rations for days, just to maintain the element of surprise. "Impossible," came Kentvar's translated voice. "Our sensors showed no ships in this region." "Your sensors were designed by civilized people," Elena replied. "We're not that civilized." The truth was both simpler and more complex than the Admiral could understand. Human ships didn't rely on the advanced power systems that alien vessels used. They ran on fusion reactors and chemical batteries, technology so primitive that consortium sensors barely registered them. Their hulls were coated with materials designed to absorb scanner beams rather than reflect them. Most importantly, human crews were willing to endure conditions that would kill most aliens, living in near-freezing temperatures to reduce heat signatures, operating in complete silence to avoid detection, eating military rations for weeks at a time because cooking would show up on thermal scans. The consortium fleet found itself facing an enemy that fought dirty, hit hard, and didn't care about the rules of civilized warfare. Elena's ship, the Vindication, led the charge. Unlike the sleek alien vessels, it looked like what it was: a weapon built by people who understood violence. Its hull was scarred metal and functional armor. Its weapons were oversized and crude by consortium standards. But when those crude weapons fired, consortium shields failed. "Target their command ship," Elena ordered. All batteries concentrated fire. The Vindication's main guns were magnetic accelerators that fired solid slugs weighing several tons each. The Hegemony flagship's shields flickered and died under the hammering impacts. Warning lights flashed across the alien bridge as atmosphere began leaking from hull breaches. "They're trying to ram us," shouted the alien weapons officer. Admiral Kenthvar couldn't believe what he was seeing. The human ship was accelerating directly toward his flagship, its forward batteries still firing. No civilized captain would attempt such a maneuver. The risk of mutual destruction was too high. But Elena Vasquez wasn't interested in survival. She was interested in sending a message. "All hands brace for impact." She called over the ship's communication system. "Today we show them what happens when you threaten our families." The Vindication struck the endless authority amidships, its reinforced prow tearing through alien hull plating like paper. Both ships tumbled through space in a twisted embrace of metal and fire. But Elena's sacrifice had served its purpose. The psychological impact on the consortium fleet was devastating. They had never faced an enemy willing to die just to hurt them. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen reported from her damaged console, "the other consortium ships are pulling back. They're requesting reinforcements." Elena, bleeding from a head wound but still functional, smiled grimly. "Let them call for help. We want the entire galaxy to see this." Throughout human space, similar battles were beginning. At the Zephyrian trade station near Jupiter, human ships emerged from the planet's radiation shadow to attack with weapons specifically designed to disrupt alien nervous systems. At the Crystal Mind research facility orbiting Venus, boarding parties armed with electromagnetic pulse weapons stormed alien vessels. The attacks weren't random violence. They were carefully planned operations designed to capture alien technology, gather intelligence, and most importantly, to broadcast a message across the galaxy. Captain Sarah Kim, commanding the stealth ship Shadow Walker, managed to penetrate the communication networks of a Crystal Mind vessel. She uploaded terabytes of data that the consortium had tried to keep secret, evidence of their plans for humanity, records of other species they had enslaved or eliminated, proof of the waste facility that was supposed to poison Earth's home system. "Broadcasted on all frequencies," she ordered her communications officer. "Every world in the galaxy needs to see what the consortium really is." The information spread faster than the consortium could contain it. Species that had trusted alien leadership suddenly saw the evidence of planned genocide. Worlds that had believed in galactic peace learned about the systematic oppression of developing civilizations. But the real shock was seeing humans fight back. For decades, the galaxy had watched humanity submit to every insult and restriction. They had seen humans bow their heads and accept their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. Now they watched human ships ramming alien cruisers. They saw human boarding parties fighting with weapons that would have been considered primitive centuries ago. They witnessed human crews dying rather than retreating. The galaxy was learning something that humans had known for millennia. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one who threatens you. It's the one who has nothing left to lose. Elena Vasquez, still bleeding from her wounds, opened a communication channel to the retreating consortium fleet. "Tell your masters," she said, her voice carrying across space to every ship and station in the system, "that humanity is no longer asking for permission. We're not begging for scraps from your table. From this moment forward, any alien ship that enters human space without invitation will be treated as hostile." She paused, watching the alien vessels accelerate away from the battle zone. "And if you try to put that garbage facility in our home system," she continued, "we'll turn every consortium world into a target. We might not be civilized, but we're very good at war." The transmission ended, but its echo would carry across the galaxy for generations to come. The consortium's response came 3 weeks later in the form of the largest fleet ever assembled. 247 ships from 16 different species, all converging on the Sol system with one mission: crush the human rebellion before it could spread to other worlds. General James Mitchell watched them approach from his command post on Luna's far side. The hidden base had been carved out of the moon's rock over 30 years, disguised as a mining operation. Now it revealed its true purpose as the nerve center for humanity's defense. "Sir," Major Sarah Park reported, "long-range sensors confirm the fleet composition: 83 Hegemony dreadnoughts, 67 Zephyrian battlecruisers, 41 Crystal Mind coordination vessels, and multiple support craft." James nodded grimly. The consortium wasn't taking any chances this time. They had brought enough firepower to glass every human world in the system. "What's our fleet strength?" he asked. 112 combat vessels, Park replied, plus the orbital defense platforms and the asteroid belt installations. The numbers didn't look good. The consortium fleet outgunned humanity by more than 2-1, and their technology was still superior in many ways. But James Mitchell hadn't spent 40 years in the military without learning something about fighting against impossible odds. "Send word to all commands," he ordered. "Implement Doctrine 7. We're not trying to win a fleet engagement. We're trying to make them quit." Throughout the solar system, human forces began moving to positions that had been planned decades in advance. Unlike the consortium's neat battle formations, human ships spread out in seemingly random patterns. Some hid behind moons and asteroids. Others positioned themselves in the shadows of planets. A few bold commanders took their vessels into the corona of the sun itself, using the star's radiation to mask their signatures. The consortium fleet, led by Supreme Admiral Thex 9 of the Hegemony, approached with the confidence of certain victory. Their scouts reported scattered human resistance, nothing that couldn't be swept aside by superior firepower and numbers. They were about to learn why humans had survived ice ages, supervolcanoes, and asteroid impacts. They were about to discover what made a species that had no natural weapons or armor, the deadliest predator on their homeworld. The first surprise came when the alien fleet reached the outer system perimeter. What looked like empty space suddenly filled with explosions as hidden minefields activated. Not sophisticated alien technology, but simple fusion bombs with proximity sensors. "Primitive devices," Supreme Admiral Thex 9 growled to his tactical officer. "Our shields can handle such crude weapons." He was right. The mines barely scratched the alien hulls, but that wasn't their real purpose. As the consortium ships dealt with the mine explosions, human sensor networks tracked their exact positions, shield frequencies, and defensive patterns. Data flowed back to Lunabase, where human computers analyzed every detail of alien capabilities. Dr. Lisa Chen, working frantically in the underground laboratories, made real-time adjustments to human weapons based on the incoming sensor data. She had been working on adaptive warfare systems for years, technology that could modify ammunition and targeting systems during actual combat. "Upload the new targeting parameters," she told her team. "Their shields are operating on frequencies, 347.2 to 351.8. Our phase cannons should be able to punch through if we modulate the beam properly." The second surprise came when the consortium fleet reached Jupiter. The gas giant's massive radiation field had always made detailed scanning difficult, which was exactly why humans had built their secret shipyard there. From Jupiter's roiling storms came something the aliens had never seen before: ships that looked like mechanical nightmares. Human engineers had stopped trying to copy alien aesthetics and instead built vessels that looked like what they were meant to do. The ship Retribution looked like a metal shark, all sharp angles and weapon ports. The Defiance resembled a flying fortress bristling with armor and guns. The Vengeance had been built around a single massive weapon that could crack a moon. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the Retribution, opened a communication channel to the alien fleet. "This is humanity's final warning," she announced. "Leave our system now, or we will show you why we conquered every predator on our homeworld." Supreme Admiral Thex 9's response was predictable. "Surrender now, and we will allow your species to continue existing as labor units. Resist, and we will cleanse every human world." Maria smiled coldly. Wrong answer. The battle that followed wasn't the clean, organized conflict that consortium doctrine expected. Human ships fought like wild animals, using tactics that horrified civilized observers. When the Zephyrian cruiser Harmony of Spheres tried to outflank a human destroyer, Captain Liu's ship suddenly accelerated into a nearby asteroid field. The aliens followed, expecting an easy kill, only to find themselves trapped in a maze of spinning rock while human fighters emerged from hiding places among the asteroids. When hegemony dreadnoughts formed their traditional battle line, human ships scattered like a school of fish, then regrouped to attack from 6 different directions at once. They used the planet's gravity wells as slingshots, turning physics itself into a weapon. Most shocking of all, humans seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses. When the destroyer Intrepid found itself surrounded by 3 enemy cruisers, Captain Walsh simply rammed the nearest one, while his crew fought boarding actions on 2 fronts simultaneously. "They fight like demons," reported one surviving Zephyrian officer. "They show no fear of death." But the real surprise came when the consortium fleet reached Earth itself. The blue planet hung in space like a jewel, seemingly defenseless. Long-range scans showed minimal orbital defenses, nothing that could stop a fleet of this size. Supreme Admiral Thex 9 prepared to give the order to bombard the human homeworld when his sensor operator made a disturbing report. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. Multiple launch sites are activating." What rose from Earth wasn't a fleet of ships. It was a swarm of missiles, thousands of them, each one guided by targeting systems that had been tracking the alien fleet since it entered the system. The consortium had always assumed that surface-to-space weapons were primitive and ineffective. They were about to learn that humans had been refining the art of missile warfare for over 1,000 years. The missiles didn't try to penetrate alien shields with brute force. Instead, they swarmed around the consortium ships like angry insects, some exploding to create electromagnetic interference, others releasing clouds of metal chaff to confuse sensors, and still others carrying warheads specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses Dr. Chen had identified. Admiral Thex 9 watched in growing horror as his perfect formation began to fall apart. Ships that had seemed invincible were being torn apart by weapons that should have been obsolete. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender demands from the humans." "Impossible," Thex 9 growled. "We still outnumber them." The communications officer's translator struggled with the human message before finally producing words that chilled every alien on the bridge. "This is General Mitchell of the Human Defense Force. You came here to destroy us. Now you're going to learn why Earth is the only planet in the galaxy that evolved apex predators as its dominant species. Surrender now, or we will hunt down every one of your ships." As if to emphasize the point, 3 more consortium vessels disappeared from the tactical display, overwhelmed by swarms of human fighters that struck like wolves and vanished before the aliens could respond. Supreme Admiral Thex 9 looked at his decimated fleet and realized something that would haunt the consortium for generations to come. They hadn't been fighting a primitive species trying to copy advanced warfare. They had been fighting natural-born killers who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to destroy things bigger and stronger than themselves, and for the first time in galactic history, the consortium was losing. 18 months after the Battle of Seoul, Ambassador Sarah. Chen walked through the halls of New Geneva Station with a very different feeling than she had experienced on Harmony's Edge. The scars on her face and hands told the story of the Siege of Titan, where she had fought alongside Marines to defend the evacuation ships. The slight limp came from shrapnel during the defense of Europa, but the real difference was in how the aliens looked at her now. The Zephyrian delegate who had once mocked human emotions now stepped aside respectfully as she passed. The hegemony representative who had dismissed human concerns avoided her gaze entirely. Even the crystal minds, who claimed to be beyond such things as fear, moved their formations carefully when humans were present. The war had lasted exactly 1 year, 3 months, and 16 days. Not because humanity had won every battle, but because the consortium had finally understood what they were really fighting. Sarah entered the council chamber where the peace negotiations were being held. The room was smaller than the grand dome on Harmony's Edge, and the seating arrangements had changed dramatically. The human section was no longer a tiny corner but a full platform equal to any other species. High Chancellor Vex 9 was there, but his massive form seemed somehow diminished. The proud leader who had once dismissed human concerns now spoke in careful, measured tones. The battle reports had made it clear what happened to consortium leaders who underestimated humanity. "Ambassador Chen," he said formally, "we are prepared to discuss terms." Sarah took her seat and activated her datapad. The document she was about to read had been 18 months in the making, written not just by diplomats but by the survivors of battles across 12 star systems. "The terms are simple," she began. "Full recognition of human sovereignty over all systems currently occupied by human populations. Immediate withdrawal of all consortium military forces from human space. Reparations for damages caused by 75 years of economic restrictions and the attempted genocide of our species." A murmur went through the alien delegates. The word genocide hung in the air like a curse. Delegate Zythka of the Zephyrians leaned forward. "Ambassador, surely that term is too strong. The consortium never intended to eliminate humanity entirely." Sarah activated a holographic display, showing the captured communications she had retrieved during the war. The chamber fell silent as they watched consortium leaders discussing the human problem and their final solution. Waste Processing Station Alpha 7, Sarah said quietly, was designed to release toxic compounds that would make the Sol system uninhabitable within 50 years. The plan was to relocate surviving humans to labor camps on barren worlds. The consortium's own documents called it managed extinction. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the waste facility, but decades of policies designed to prevent human expansion, limit their population growth, and gradually reduce them to a manageable workforce. Those were contingency plans, protested Delegate Thrum 3 of the Crystal Mines. Never officially approved. They were approved the day you decided to build that facility in our home system, Sarah replied. Everything else was just paperwork. Supreme Admiral Thex 9, one of the few consortium military leaders to survive the war, spoke up from his position at the defendants' table. The consortium did not understand the true nature of human capabilities. If we had known, you would have killed us all 75 years ago, Sarah finished. Yes, we know. That's why we prepared in secret. The preparation had been the key to everything. While the consortium saw humans as weak and disorganized, humanity had been quietly uniting behind a single purpose. Every slight, every restriction, every casual insult had been fuel for the greatest military buildup in galactic history. Dr. Sarah Kim, now wearing the uniform of a Human Defense Force general, stood at Sarah's side. She had been instrumental in developing the adaptive weapons that had given humanity its edge in combat. The galaxy needs to understand something, Dr. Kim said, addressing the assembled delegates. Humans didn't invent advanced technology. We invented something else, the ability to take any tool and turn it into a weapon. She was right. Human engineers hadn't created energy shields or faster-than-light drives, but they had figured out how to make shields that could ram through walls and FTL drives that could turn a cargo ship into a guided missile. More importantly, they had weaponized their own psychology. The same pack-hunting instincts that had made them apex predators on Earth translated perfectly to space warfare. The same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried them through ice ages and extinction events now applied to galactic conflicts. The terms also include humanity's admission to the Galactic Council as a permanent member, Sarah continued, with full voting rights and veto power over any actions affecting human space. Impossible, growled High Chancellor Vex 9. No single species has held such power since the consortium's founding. Then maybe it's time for the consortium to change, Sarah replied. Because this war proves something that every species in this room needs to remember. Humanity doesn't fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies regret starting the fight in the first place. The truth of that statement was written in the wreckage of 24 star systems. Human tactics during the war had been designed not just to achieve military objectives, but to inflict maximum psychological damage on the enemy. When consortium forces attacked human colonies, they found civilian evacuation ships that turned out to be disguised warships. When they tried to capture human officers for interrogation, they discovered that every human carried neural implants that would wipe their memories rather than allow capture. Most disturbing of all, humans had proven willing to destroy their own worlds rather than let them fall into enemy hands. The consortium had been forced to watch in horror as human colonists on 3 separate worlds activated fusion charges that rendered their planets uninhabitable. The final term, Sarah said, consulting her datapad, concerns the protection of other species. Any member of the consortium found to be planning the systematic oppression or elimination of a developing civilization will be subject to human intervention. The chamber erupted in protests from multiple species. The idea that humans would appoint themselves as galactic peacekeepers was almost as shocking as their military capabilities. Who gave you the right to police the galaxy? Demanded Delegate Zithka. Sarah stood and walked to the center of the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried across the room with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much war. We gave ourselves that right, she said simply. Just like we gave ourselves the right to exist. Just like we gave ourselves the right to defend our homes. The consortium had 75 years to prove that civilized species could govern themselves responsibly. You failed. She gestured to the evidence displays still showing the planned genocide of humanity. Every species in this room watched while you planned to murder 12 billion people. Some of you helped. Others just didn't care enough to object. Well, now you know what happens when humans decide we care. The negotiations continued for 6 more days, but the outcome was never in doubt. The consortium had lost not just a war, but its moral authority to govern the galaxy. Other species, inspired by humanity's example, were already demanding their own rights and freedoms. When the treaty was finally signed, Sarah Chen affixed her signature with a pen made from metal, salvaged from the wreckage of the Endless Authority. It was a small gesture, but one that every alien delegate understood perfectly. 3 months later, the first human battleship took its place in the consortium patrol fleet. The HSF never again was everything the aliens had feared in human military philosophy. It was ugly, overarmed, and designed to absorb incredible amounts of damage while continuing to fight. Captain Elena Vasquez, recovered from her injuries at Sol, stood on the bridge and looked out at the galaxy they now helped to patrol. Somewhere out there were species still being oppressed, still being told they weren't good enough to govern themselves. They would learn, as humanity had learned, that sometimes the only way to earn respect was to make the alternative too painful to consider. The galaxy was different now. Not necessarily better, but definitely more honest about what it took to survive among the stars. And at the center of it all, humanity had taken its place not as servants or junior partners, but as the species other civilizations called when they needed someone willing to do what had to be done. The day humanity said enough had become the day the galaxy learned that some lines should never be crossed, because on the other side of those lines, predators were waiting,